our Fox News Town Hall with Mayor Pete Buttigieg at Stevens High School in Claremont, New Hampshire. We want to turn now to foreign policy, which we haven't had much of a chance to talk about. Brian Cohen is a teacher at the Putney School, also from that strange place called Vermont. Brian?
Hi, Mayor Pete. You've seen war firsthand. I'm wondering, under what circumstances would you consider the use of military force?
You know, when you have been ordered abroad on the command of a U.S. president, you think a lot about what's at stake in that office. And there's nothing more grave than the fact that that office holds the power to deploy troops into war zones. I'm really concerned about the fact that right now we're seeing that power talked about in a very casual way. First, there was saber rattling, a suggestion that we would send troops to deal with Venezuela, which, as horrible as the situation is there, is not one where I see U.S. lives at risk. And now you see the same thing, or something different, but that same kind of saber rattling with Iran. By the way, reportedly engineered by John Bolton, who was one of the people who built the war in Iraq. How somebody who is behind that, one of the worst foreign policy mistakes in American history, is allowed anywhere near the situation room of a president who claims, probably falsely, but claims that he was against the Iraq war all along, is unbelievable to me. The next president will have two major jobs overseas. One of them is just establishing U.S. credibility again. But the other one is setting a bar, and I believe it must be a higher bar than we've had so far, on what it takes for troops to be deployed overseas, especially unilaterally. And I think that that bar has to be based on when core U.S. life or death interests are at stake. And if they're not, or if they're not immediately threatened in a way that leaves us no other choice, then it doesn't mean we retreat into our shell. We can use economic, diplomatic, cyber, and other security tools in order to deal with it. But you do not send young men and women into war when there's an alternative.
Mayor, let's talk about this a little. You gave us a kind of overview there, but yeah, from your 6-7 months on the ground in Afghanistan, what is the biggest lesson? Maybe it's a little one, but you know, a specific one, but the biggest lesson that you would take into the Oval Office should you become Commander-in-Chief?
Well, one of the biggest, actually, is, aside from the foreign policy and security matters, is just the experience of coming to know and trust Americans who are completely different from you. Part of my job was driving or guarding vehicles when we took vehicle movements outside the wire, either around Kabul or occasionally between Kabul and Bagram. And when somebody got in my vehicle, they did not care whether I was a Democrat or Republican. They did not care what country my dad immigrated from or whether I was going home to a boyfriend or a girlfriend. They wanted to know if I had studied the route and knew how to look out for IEDs, and if I had chambered around in my M4, and if I knew what to do if something happened to us. And that kind of trust that we built, people of different ages and races and definitely different political views. Some of the folks I served with might be watching right now. That kind of bond is something that I wish more Americans had, but I don't think you should have to go to war in order to have it. It's one of the reasons why I think national service, at a time like this where we're so fractured and divided, would do a lot of good. Yes, military, but perhaps also more opportunities in the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, different service year opportunities that young people can have here in the U.S. to thicken the fabric. The other thing that I learned while I was abroad is even during these challenging times, at least my deployment, of course, was before this presidency, but how much respect people have for our country. I really could feel that when I walked into a room, especially on a ISAF headquarters base where you had people from every country in our coalition, that flag that was on my shoulder represented a country that was known for keeping its word. Even our enemies viewed us that way. And however imperfectly we've upheld our values, I could feel how important that was to our safety, as important as my body armor. And when I read reports that the president is considering pardoning or even preemptively pardoning war criminals, even after they have been tried by a jury of their peers, meaning that other U.S. service members in a legal proceeding determined that they had committed crimes, that is undermining the foundation of American moral authority, and I think in the long run, that is putting troops at risk.